Yeah. Okay, so because we did cut short last week, I'm going to back up a little bit and review um, the particular verse that we're working with. And I thought last week we were going to get into some, could you not eat my rug? I thought we were getting into some deep water last week. And then as I was preparing for this week, I realized it's getting deeper because we're getting into eventually, I'm having to set a lot of groundwork, but trying to understand the ministering angels, the fiery sword. What does that have to do with us in the wilderness? Is there more to this wrestling match that Jacob had? I think that there is. So I'm going to present to you one idea about the wrestling match that Jacob had with the man/angel all night long. And the conversation that he has with Esau following that, because we're going to pull into some context, some things that the sages believe were going on in that wrestling match. We alluded to it a little bit, how that dust is said to represent the 12 tribes of Israel. There's some much more interesting information deeper than that I think will just kind of make you grin when you realize how precious we are to the Father. But it's going to lead us into some places that if you're new to Torah, it might be a little scary because it's just so deep. And I'm assuming you know what the feasts are. I'm assuming you know the wilderness journey and all the problems on the wilderness journey. I just have to assume you're not a Torah beginner, that you at least have a fundamental understanding of it. But if you feel like you're in over your head, please type the questions in, and either one of the other students can answer if they know the answer. And then I can always take a look afterward. But at some point, there's always going to be people around that can explain the basics. But if we can get deeper, why not? Why not? Because, I mean, you guys are going with me. You're not complaining yet that it's too deep. So I don't know what I'll have to do to make you complain, but I haven't reached that point yet. And so to me, it's just explaining Revelation in a way that I've never seen it before. It's like a much bigger picture instead of taking the little chunks that I could understand and trying to figure out how does it fit together. Well, it's like finally it's starting to fit together. And even Yeshua's answer, when they confront him, remember at the Feast of Dedication at Hanukkah in the temple, and said, if you're the Messiah, tell us plainly. And he starts talking about sheep. And like, Yeshua, what are you doing? I mean, they're asking you if you're the Messiah, and you start talking about your sheep can hear your voice. What do you mean by that? Well, if you don't know the traditional belief about Kislev 25 or the Feast of Hanukkah and the Mishkan, which is what we're studying, the Mishkan coming up from the wilderness and what happened there, if you don't know that Jewish background to what happened upon the completion of the Mishkan, if you don't understand the background of the wrestling match with the angel and Jacob, then Yeshua's answer does seem to be off in left field. Like, well, you know, he just started telling a story about sheep. No, he's telling them very specifically some things that if they know the tradition, and these are Judeans, they would. The Judeans were fanatically religious compared to the Galileans. Right? It'd be like maybe Northerners and Southerners in the United States. They can be radically different. They speak differently. Their culture's different. So the true religious fanatics are going to be found in Judea. And they're the ones questioning Yeshua. Yeshua's going to answer them about sheep. Well, we're going to, in this segment, this verse, who is this coming up from the wilderness? We're going to address why Yeshua was talking about sheep. And why he said his sheep would know his voice. It goes back to the night with Jacob and the wrestling match. And to me, it was just a beautiful find. It was like a treasure chest, you know, and it's almost like I don't know if you were a little kid, if you ever went into your mom's jewelry box or into your dad's. Sometimes dads have a little thing on their dresser that's got rings and cufflinks and stuff they wear. And if you were a kid, if you ever got into that little box and you started trying on your parents' jewelry, it's kind of like that. It's like we're opening up this treasure chest of the word, and we're able to put on these things, you know, in terms of understanding them. So I'm going to shut up at this point and share my screen because I really want to get to some of the good stuff tonight. Okay, and now here's the verse we're working with, and we will probably work with it next week too. I don't see us finishing this week because we get deeper and deeper and deeper. I think by next week, maybe we'll finish this, and then we're going to go to the couch of Solomon and the 60 armed men that surround it. But this will set the stage for that. So here's the verse. What or who is this coming up from the wilderness? It's a Mishkan. What is a Mishkan? Well, it's the Mishkan, the tabernacle itself, and all the stuff that goes in it. But we know from context that the Mishkan also represents the people. The Mishkan had to be built so that his presence could dwell among them. So who, what, it doesn't really matter. What is this coming up from the wilderness? Like columns of smoke, perfumed with myrrh and frankincense, with all the scented powders of the merchant. Right, so we've been working through this information, looking at what these bullet points represent. Asher wants to eat my rug. All right, so that puts in the setting of the wilderness, that if we want to understand the end times, if we want to understand why Revelation keeps pointing us to the wilderness, like the woman going into the wilderness, where she's going to be nourished for a time and times and half a time, or whether we're looking at the scarlet harlot, she goes into the wilderness, right? It's a people group that's being examined. Some of them will be found to be adulteresses, and some of them will be the righteous woman, right? And if you'll remember, it's been a while since we talked about the principle, but if you'll remember, we had a principle called the third group, where in the refiner's fire, there's only about a third that are expected to make it out. How many died versus how many made it out of the wilderness? Was it a third? I don't know that we're given a number like that, but when a generation dies out, new generation goes in, it's entirely possible that it boiled down to that particular number. But the message there is you're going to have more start the journey than actually finish it. Right? And like we say, when we're talking about the wilderness experience, we're not really challenging anyone's salvation. If he's delivered you from Egypt, you're saved, right? You're saved from the realm of death. Does that mean that you're entitled to walk into the holy city? Apparently not. Apparently there's two different kinds of parables. There's salvation parables. Everybody gets paid the same. But there's also inheritance parables where as a result of what you've invested in the kingdom, that's what you can expect your experience to be in the kingdom. And so they're both simultaneously true. The wilderness, though, is a testing ground of a saved people. And the same faith that you exercised in order to call upon Yeshua's name for salvation, you should continue walking in that faith. You should continue calling upon him for your salvation in the wilderness as you go through those tests. And you grow in your faith, you grow in sanctification, you grow in holiness, so that when it's time to cross over, when it's time to enter in, that as you come up from the wilderness, the Mishkan, which is teaching you the lessons of holiness, that you can inherit, that you will be able to go through the gate of the holy city, So the wilderness is either a place that you can go up, that you can ascend spiritually, or it is also a place of removal. It's a sorting out place. Remember, Yeshua talked about sheep and goats. Well, sheep and goats are both kosher. That's a challenge. Don't think too long about that one. All right. And then we covered all the good things that are in the wilderness that are part of our preparation. And there's going to be two particular things out of this list here of 9 things, which is more than 9 if we break down number 7 into the well, the manna, and the clouds. But if we look at 2 of these, 5 and 6, which would be the Levitical divisions are from the wilderness, and the monarchy is from the wilderness, that's going to pop up again. And it's going to go back to Jacob's dust. What is the significance of the wrestling match that Jacob had with the angel all night long? Because there's a play on word there with wrestling and the Hebrew word for wrestling and the Hebrew word for dust. And as a result of the dust that they kicked up in this wrestling match and the spiritual battle that was going on here, this is where the sages say Jacob received the right to pass along the blessing, which remember are the spices, as we go back here, with all the scented powders of the merchant. We kind of deconstructed that and said, okay, this applies to the 12 tribes. These are the scented powders of the merchant. Because remember, the merchant, he goes near and far. He takes things out, but he also brings these very exotic, wonderful things back in. And so with the scattering of Israel, they're scattered out among the nations, but yet when they come back, they're going to be columns of smoke. And there's a very particular thing about the columns of smoke that we're going to be perfumed with myrrh and frankincense. And they're also going to represent the scented powders of the merchant. The tribes may have been scattered out there among the nations, but when they're spicy, they're going to be this beautiful array of spices that come back in. And again, these powders, it's going to relate to their identity as the 12 tribes, being able to cross over into their inheritance in the land and being associated with that wrestling match that Jacob had with the angel, where they didn't just wrestle, they kicked up some dust. And therefore the dust is going to be associated with the 12 tribes. We'll look at a passage, I think we've read it before, when we were talking about maybe the Aaronic benediction or Hebrew prayer. And we talked about how the stones of Jerusalem are to be cherished. And it says, when the stones and the dust are cherished, that's when Messiah will return. And so if we know all the things that the dust can represent, and one thing the dust can represent, if you're writing down in your symbol book, if you want to add another symbol to your book, and it won't be across the board, you'll have to read your text to know if this is the particular symbol being applied. But one of the symbols you might want to add to your symbol book is that the dust can represent the 12 tribes of Israel. Dust can represent the 12 tribes of Israel, right? So that's kind of our working text. And it just shows us the importance of what we do in the wilderness. We're discounting many times, I think, the importance of where we are and what we're doing because we feel so out of kilter. We can't sit in those comfortable places that we did in church. We know too much at this point. We can't sit in a comfortable place in a synagogue. We know too much about Yeshua. And so there's no comfortable place for us. And I think because we are displaced from the systems, remember, we're supposed to beware of systems that cease to function in a righteous way. Because we're suspicious of these systems, because we can't function in a system properly or with full disclosure, sometimes we discount the importance of where we are. And if you look at the wilderness walk, do you realize there was maybe less grace exercised in the wilderness than there was when they went into the land? Because see, remember, if they go in the land, they're going to get bad king after bad king, judge, good judge, bad judge, good judge, bad judge, bad, bad king, bad, bad king, good king. They're doing all sorts of these idolatrous antics in the land of promise. But one little mess up in the wilderness and bam, you're toast, literally. One little mess up, bam, the earth swallows you up. One little mistake, bam, the plague has you. And so it's almost telling you that what you do in the wilderness really is vital. What we are discounting as an in-between place is actually a most important location for us, especially as we're out here among the nations. You know, we're these scented powders of the merchant, the avaka. Remember, and it means dust. Avaka is dust. And so it goes back to, again, avak, the wrestling match that has with Esau's angel. I'm putting that in quote unquotes because I'm not going to ask you to believe that. We're going to present some scripture. We're going to present some context. And then if that's what you believe at the end of it, great. If you don't believe it, great. I mean, I'm not invested in it. I don't own shares. But I think if we can accept that particular time, then it's going to clear up some things in Revelation for us. It's going to clear up Yeshua's conversation about sheep and so forth. But each of those 12 tribes is going to represent a different spice, a different powder, a different blessing, gift, as they come up from the wilderness and then they cross over into the land of their inheritance, because that's what's happening when Jacob goes back. He's crossing the Yavok stream, the river. What is he doing? He's taking his sons back to the land of their inheritance. Right. So what's happening there is going to prophesy of something that could affect us. If we are coming back from an exile, or if we are preparing, if we are in this in-between place, then we can look at the wrestling match. We can look at the journey through the wilderness and see the high standard of behavior that had to be practiced there. If you expected to go into the land, you had to raise the bar, like Joshua and Caleb, like the Levites who took up the sword against their brother. If I'm not mistaken, the commentaries say that the Levites, other than we had a problem there with Nadav and Abihu, but the Levites did not partake in the golden calf, and they did not partake as a group in the sin of the 10 spies, and therefore the Levites and the women were able to go over. That they weren't the big participants in either the golden calf or the report of the 10 spies. At any rate, if so, then the Levites would play a huge role. They would be the ones who kind of carry that torch of the Mishkan from the wilderness into the over. Right. So kingdom of priests crossing over. We talked about how if Israel is encamping the way that they should be camping in obedience, then they are becoming part of this divine machine that the Mishkan was designed to be, to keep the earth in harmony and peace. Our next verse, like I said, is going to be King Solomon's couch, and he's specifically mentioned as King Shlomo. And King Shlomo, he's the king to whom peace belongs. If you remember, we said that one of the traditions is only King Messiah is going to be able to synchronize the power of the four winds. And this is why it was such a marvel to the disciples that Yeshua could speak to the wind and say, peace, be still. And they obeyed, because that was a clear sign. And it wasn't a sign they asked for. It was just, they asked to be saved. And in being saved, they saw a sign. The wind and sea obey him. Only King Messiah can do that. Why did King Messiah to do that? because Israel didn't. They kept falling down on the job in the wilderness. In their encampments around the Mishkan, they kept rebelling, gossiping, complaining, all that carrying on. And so, we have fits and starts, but it's going to be King Messiah who's going to bring all this back into harmony. And this harmony, one of the characteristics, remember, was who is this coming up the like columns of smoke. Well, one of the traditions is when the smoke of the outer altar went up, it went straight up, and it was unaffected by the wind. If the wind was blowing, it had no effect. It just went straight up. What is that telling us? Well, if King Messiah is in charge, he controls the four winds, they can't damage us. But if we are also doing our job in our encampments, if the 12 tribes spices, the powdered spices of the merchant, if they are encamped properly as they should be, then again, it's bringing harmony to the four winds, and there's no reason that there should be any damaging wind coming from one direction or the other, cause that smoke to be blown in a particular direction or even blown down, right? Smoke always tries to strive upward. So that's kind of, let's get over that so that we can get back into this review, because those lessons are going to be foundational again to helping us understand what comes up out of the wilderness and how Revelation is explaining that process. Okay, so let's review this. And this is where we were taking some of the information out of the Midrash. Remember, we went over King Belshazzar and the writing on the wall, because King Belshazzar was the last Babylonian king. He was the last god, right? And so there were particular things that happened at that feast that can be a guide for us, just by fact of Daniel, okay, oh king, this is the last night. You're going to be killed. And we talked about how the Midrash says that two of his guards took the candlestick, bashed him over the head all night, wounded, and then he expired, right? However, we're gonna look at this another way too. We're gonna look at another aspect of this. But Revelation 13, we're working in chapter 13 a lot, verse 3. It says, I saw one of his heads as if it had been fatally wounded. Belshazzar, the one who saw the writing on the wall, he would have been the one who had a fatal head wound. And it says his fatal wound was healed, and the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast. Well, what I hope to show you is that this was a deception. There's going to be a pattern of deception. This beast will only appear to be healed if you want to believe it. That's the way deception works. It's going to take you all the way back to faith. Were those really serpents? Did people really saw the serpents? But then Moses' serpent, his rod, eats up the other serpents. Were they really serpents? Or were they simply sorcery? Could you only see them if you wanted to believe there was life in them? Because if you believe that life is in them, you will perceive them as being real. If you know, according to the word, that there is no life in them, that they are in the realm of death because they were produced through sorcery, you know there's no life in it. It's a lie. It's a deceit. And what happens? Moses' rod, his serpent, the word of Moses, it consumes the lie and the deceit. Sword of the mouth, right? The word is the sword of the mouth. And this is going to be the pattern that we see finally resolved in Revelation, where the deceit of the serpent, he's always been able to deceive by making you think it was real and there was life in it. And it's the same thing. Revelation says the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast. They are going to look at some aspect of Babylon, the Babylonian systems, they are going to believe that something had died, but yet that wound was healed. It's alive after all. That's going to be a deceit. Those who know the word will know better, that no life could ever come out of that thing that's going to appear to be healed, or they will appear to have life. It's already dead. It's dead, was dead, is dead, will be dead. Dead, dead, dead. But if you don't know the word, if you're not grounded in the word, you might be amazed and follow after the beast. Okay. And that's the danger of getting caught up in a lot of conspiracy theories. You're conditioning your mind to believe that what is dead is alive. If you're looking at these dead systems from the realm of death, preaching death, it's a dead system. Don't think it's alive. Don't think there's life. Give it that much credit. Right? Because the one you serve, and this is going to be a great ending to this Jacob and the angel, the one you serve is the one that has the true power. Believe it or not, what is in you, the power that is in you, is actually more than the one that you're wrestling with, who is exercising sorcery and who is deceiving you. And Yeshua is straightening that out with his little sheep speech. Then we're going to skip down to 12 and 13, verses 12 and 13. Remember, the last beast is the red one, or Rome, and it's like the first, Babylon. It says he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence. Who was the first beast? Babylon. Babylon is the first beast. So how can he exercise all the authority of the first beast in his presence? Well, the last beast, Rome, is still part of the same image. Remember the golden image? Well, you got a golden head, you have iron legs. It's still one image. Different kingdoms, one image. All right, it's one beast, but it's four beasts. It's one beast, but when you look at those systems that have been implanted all over the earth. It says he makes the earth, and those who live on it worship the first beast, whose fatal wound was healed. He performs great signs, so that he even makes fire come down out of the sky to the earth in the presence of the people. This is a sign that when you see it, if you don't know the word, you may not know the difference between this and the fire of the two witnesses, because the fire from them is going to come out of their mouths. It's the sword of the word. It's the words you speak. Why do we study the word? Why do we internalize the word? So that we'll know the difference between a sorcery, something that appears to have life in it, and what the word says is life, or what the word says is death. And this is why it's so vital. This is, the Levites, they were chastised in the prophets because they did not teach Israel the difference between clean and unclean. I think it's in there at least twice. I'd have to Bible search it at least twice. I know I've run across that, where the Levites are chastised. They have not taught my people the difference between clean and unclean. Why do you need to know that? So they won't be deceived, because remember, Babylon is corrupting them. Babylon wasn't a one-time thing. Babylon came in wave after wave after wave before it finally took down Jerusalem. There was infringement after infringement after infringement. They tried to be pals. They tried to be friends. What did they do? They just wormed their way into the palace, into the temple, so they could see where all the loot was. They even had the king send some of the best young men. That's how Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego ended up in Babylon before Jerusalem ever fell. It was a continual hammering until it finally fell. Right? So if you don't know the word, it may appear to you that Babylon is still alive, right? The systems are there. It doesn't mean there's life in them, right? So a sign of fire from the sky, be on the alert. And we don't know, is it something physical? Is a thing? Is it a missile? Is it a just outright miracle? What is it? We don't know. We're not told that. We're just told fire from the sky. That's going to be given as a sign here. He performs great signs. This tells you that people will be conditioned to look for a miraculous sign. Who does Yeshua say looks for a sign? An adulterous generation. What was the generation of the wilderness? They were adulterous. They were. They worshiped a calf. They joined up with the Midianite women. They had, idolatrous meals and worshiped idols in the wilderness. They were an adulterous generation. So the deception, don't be deceived by something spectacular, something that makes you go, wow, something that puts you in awe, because in the natural realm, it just doesn't look like that would be possible, or it's just so spectacular. Beware of that sort of thing, because Yeshua was just half the truth. If you'll remember, he never really emphasized the miracles. He said works. What works is he talking about? He never really said, you know what, you should believe me because, I multiplied the bread. You should believe me because I healed lame people. You should believe me because I did this. He says the works, when he's talking about the works, he's talking about, I told you the truth. If you look back in context, he says, I told you the truth and you don't believe me. Because you don't want to believe the truth. You want to believe the sign. The problem, the sign is that there's a 50-50 chance, at least, it can be an act of sorcery. And if you want to believe it, you'll fall right into it. If you want to believe Pharaoh's snakes were real, you can believe they were real. If you want to believe they were from the realm of death, conjured up by sorcery, that have no power against the word of truth, then you believe that. But see, that was the preface for the wilderness. High bar of faith. As I said, they didn't mix the message with faith. So they fell in the wilderness. But see, this deception, there's a background there. If he can make fire come from the sky, it's going to make you think of Elijah. Oh, this must be one of the two witnesses. Well, the deceiver is going to want you to think that. You're going to have to test Elijah's, because remember, Elijah was the herald of Messiah. Elijah will be the herald of Messiah. Was, is, will come, right? And so if we know Elijah's the one that called down fire, miraculous fire, to expose the idolatry of the priests of Baal, then it's going to be something along that line. Now, are they going to dig a pit and pour water in it and put a sacrifice on the altar and dance around the altar? I doubt if it will be exactly like that, because prophecy typically is not fulfilled the same way twice. It will have the earmarks. Will have things that match up, but it's a context for that generation. So it will be that generation's equivalent. And so the sorcerer is this beast. He's going to make people believe, well, he's not going to make them, they're going to want to believe that he can make fire come from the sky. They might believe he's Elijah if he's able to make fire come from the sky. Could be, that might be the deception. But just to review, and I think we need to review this so we don't forget as we're talking about the scarlet beast, because there's going to be a red dragon giving his authority to the scarlet beast. The question is, why is the dragon red? Why is the beast red? Revelation 17:3 says, he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness. There's the wilderness between Egypt and Israel. But remember, there's also a wilderness of the nations, right? It's that in-between place that he brings you. He brings you out of the realm of death, and he begins preparing you. He begins forming you into a mishkan. He begins teaching you the ways of holiness, clean, unclean. And so he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, an in-between place, a place of decision, a place of having to mix faith with every word in order to make it to the next moment. I have to mix my faith with his word. It says, I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. All right, we're going to push the heads and horns aside for a while, because those are usually the most iffy parts of a prophecy, is the heads and the horns. But the scarlet beast, full of blasphemous names. What was going on in King Belshazzar's feast? Blasphemy, absolutely blasphemy. Right? What did the king of Babylon do? He tried to elevate his name above the name of the Holy One. And so these beast kingdoms will have a history of blasphemy against the Holy One and his people. If they're like in the time of the Greeks, if the Jews were trying to read the Torah, if they were circumcising their little boys, if they're eating kosher, what is the Greek beast going to try to do? It's going to try to enforce laws that make those things against the law. Right? That's blasphemy against those who dwell in heaven. That's blasphemy against those who dwell in the Mishkan. They're being obedient. They're mixing faith with the word. And so this woman is sitting on a scarlet beast. In other words, the woman, Israel, there will be those among her, and it always makes me think of that third group, the 1/3 that actually makes it through the refining fire. But it also makes me think of the 2/3 that didn't make it through the wilderness. She's sitting on a scarlet beast. What is she doing? She might think she's riding the beast. Actually, the beast is taking her for a ride, because that's the emotion, that's the soul, appetite, emotion, desire, and intellect. So those who were at the mercy of their appetite, emotion, desire, and intellect, these are going to be those who fall in the wilderness. They're not going to make it over the Jordan into their inheritance. That takes you back to Esau, who is the scarlet beast, Genesis 25:25. It says, now the first came out red, Admoni, all over like a hairy garment, and they named him Esau. What was Elijah like? He was kind of hairy. What was John the Baptist like? Kind of hairy. They would wear hairy garments. You see how the beast tries to mimic that which is holy? Where the beast might want to mimic the behavior of the herald of the Messiah. But Esau is born Admoni, red. So Admoni is the red one. In Jewish literature, if you run across something, or if you're reading a prayer book and you're reading a prayer about deliver us from the red one, you'll see that in the Hanukkah liturgy. If you have a prayer book that has Hanukkah prayers in it, one of the prayers very specifically will say, deliver us from the red one. The red one is Esau, that's Admoni. And so later, Esau really, nails that identity down, because he sells his birthright. It says, for a mouthful of that red stuff there in English, but in Hebrew, it's mean ha'adom, from the red. He says, feed me from the red. Red can represent redemption. It can represent protection in a time of judgment, but red can also represent sensuality and the heat of passion, the heat of desire. Whatever Esau wanted, Esau got. If he saw a pretty girl, he got a pretty girl. If he saw something to eat, he gobbled it up. If he saw an animal, he'd trap it, snare it, shoot it, right? Appetite, emotion, desire, and intellect. That's what the red one represents. So the last beast empire, the full empire, before we get into the feet, was Rome, the iron legs. And the Jews identified Rome as the red one. That's why we've done some of the historical study to kind of trace the dragon, Pharaoh Necho, all the way up into Babylon, where the authority was passed on historically to the king of Babylon. But from a more spiritual standpoint, the last beast empire is Rome, the red one. And in Daniel's prophecy, what we see is that only a mixture of Rome's iron legs would extend into the clay feet. Right? They're going to have mixed but not married, I think was the phrase we ended up coming up with. But Rome is the red one. Right, so the red one's still around. He's got his feet on the nations. He's actually got his feet on the Temple Mount right now. One of those systems is on the Temple Mount. And, as we're getting closer to the fast of Tammuz, make sure I got the date right on that. We need to think about that. The jeopardy, the straits that we're coming into. That's important. We need to know our times, and we need to know that this period when Moses was up on the mountain after Shavuot, receiving the tablets, that's when we fall into great temptation. All right, but that's why Yeshua taught us to pray, deliver us from the evil. Don't let us be deceived by a golden calf, because if you remember, one of the things we said about the golden calf is the sages believe that the reason the golden calf was able to deceive so many is that Jannes and Jambres, who are mentioned in the New Testament from Egypt, they actually knew sorcery, and they were able to make the calf appear to come alive and eat grass, which is what the king of Babylon did later. But he had the appearance. It was a sorcery. It was a deception. If you believe the word of Moses, you could look at that calf and say, that calf's dead as it can be. But if you wanted to believe that the calf had life, then you would disregard the word of Moses. You would disregard the 10 words of the Holy One, the caution against adultery, the caution against idolatry, the caution against making an image. And you would say, wait a minute, that calf moved. I have to worship the image of the beast here. But you knew better if you wanted to know better. But as we're getting into this time of the fasts, it's going to get pushed off a day because of Shabbat, but it'll fall on July 17th this year. July 17th begins the fast of Tammuz. And don't let that day come up on you without even preparing for the fast day. There's things going on in the world, right? All sorts of, we would call them machinations, little machines trying to work. In fact, if you did nothing more than do the Amidah, you would be praying against those evil designs, right? But however you pray, you should be praying during this period that this great deceit would not be perpetuated. So the systems of the beast, from Babylon to Rome, from the head down to the legs, they would be mixed among the nations with the feet, the 10 feet, 10 toes and the feet. Yet, remember, it's one image. So the feet are fastened to the body, fastened to the legs, which are fastened to the lower torso, which is fastened to the upper torso, which is fastened to the head. You can trace today's images, systems of the beast, all the way back up to Babylon. And we've talked about this principle before, and I don't think I ever gave you the scripture that it's based on, where when there's a kingdom change, when one beast kingdom, its time is full, like King Belshazzar being told, okay, time's up. Your judgment's going to come. I mean, it's coming now. That when those regimes change, it's as quick as taking, a cup of wine and pouring it into another cup. It's that fast. Because these beast kingdoms are decreed according to a divine timeline. Once their time is full, it's not like King Hezekiah, who might get an extension because he repents. Once that blasphemy has reached its height, just like King Belshazzar taking out the holy vessels and feasting with the holy vessels, saying basically, I own you people. I own the Jews. I own Israel. I'm the king. I'm the King of Kings. But he finds out, the writing on the wall says, oh, no, you're not. And tonight I'm going to pour what's in your cup into the next one. I'm going to pour you into Media Persia. And that's exactly what happened. But the scripture that it's based on is Ezekiel 26, verse 2. This is the pattern or the paradigm that understanding is based on. It says, Son of man, because Tyre has said in regard to Jerusalem, aha, the gateway of the peoples is broken. The gateway of the peoples. You see how Jerusalem is seen as a gateway of the peoples. It has opened to me. I shall be filled now that she is laid waste. So remember, Hiram of Tyre helped Solomon with the materials to build Jerusalem and the temple. And so I'm sure starting from that point, at least, there was probably a lot of envy concerning the wealth of Jerusalem and the beauty and the wealth that was there just in the temple. And so as they regard the fall of Jerusalem, the gateway of the peoples, now the king of Tyre, and he's more of a paradigm, right? Because sometimes as you're looking at the prophecies, I believe it's in Isaiah where he's talking to different world leaders, sometimes you'll notice they seem to be out of order, kind of anachronistic. It's because it's a paradigm, right? It's an archetype of this particular mindset. And so the king of Tyre is saying, now that Jerusalem's empty, now I can be filled up. Right? Because remember, King Solomon was an incredible merchant king. You know, it even speaks of the cargoes that he brought in and how long it took his ships to go out and to come back into port. And so Tyre, which was a merchant kingdom, saw that as an opportunity. If Jerusalem's wealth is emptied, then it's just going to pour into us. We will take the place of that commercial center. So that's kind of the principle. When you pass from one kingdom to another, it's not that another kingdom really comes up alongside and competes. It's that the wealth of that kingdom that's ending is just being poured in to the next kingdom. And we use the example of cups stacked one on top of the other, like the image of the beast, kingdoms stacked one on top of the other. Iron, bronze, silver, gold. So it's one stack, but it's 4 kingdoms. So it'll be poured from one to the other. When you get down to the last cup, what happens? The cup of wrath gets poured out. This is what we're reading about in Yeshua's prophecies, the prophets themselves of the Tanakh, Revelation, the apostles. They all talk about a day that's coming when the cup of wrath will be poured out. The wine that's been, foaming from one cup to the next with the world kingdoms. Okay, the last kingdom, the cup's going to be there. And basically, he's going to pour it out. With his wrath, he will pour out that last cup. And Esau will no longer have power on the earth. Because if you remember the prophecy of the twins, interesting little wordplay that I didn't notice till a couple of weeks ago when Rabbi Lux pointed it out. The prophecy to Rebecca was that 2 nations are in your womb. Because, it feels like there's a war in there. He pointed out that the text doesn't say there will be 2 nations. There are already 2 nations in your womb. From the womb, they were 2 nations. And so if they're already at war in your womb, if they're already 2 separate people with 2 separate inclinations, then imagine how much more once they're outside the womb, their paths are going to be different. So Esau comes out. He's the red one. He's the red beast. And then Jacob or Yaakov, his word is like that which comes after. There's a Torah portion called Akev, after, following. Yaakov comes out holding the heel, which they say the heel will always represent the end of something. They say the heel represents Esau, because the heel is the lowest part of the human body, and it's constantly in contact with the earth. It's earthbound. It's more like the earth in heaven in terms of what part does it cling to. Your head represents the spirit because it's the closest to heaven, but the heel symbolizes the earth, the lower nature, the soul, because it's closer to that realm. And so Jacob comes out holding Esau's heel. What's going to happen? Jacob's sons, Jacob's children, the dust, the powdered spices of the merchant, when they come up out of the wilderness, they will see the end of Esau's reign on earth. Jacob's children, it's because of what he did as part of these prophecies, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and that's why scripture just keeps mentioning, because of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, remember this, do this. Well, Jacob's fight with Esau's angel, remember, he's not going to let go, right? Jacob is tenacious. That's the prophecy. Jacob's descendants will be tenacious. They will hang on, and they will see the end of Esau's reign on earth when the day breaks, because Esau's power is in the night of exile. His power is not in the day. Remember, we're always told you were children of light. You were not children of the night. You were supposed to shine in the night of exile. You were not the children of the night. You were the children of the day. So you're a little out of kilter in the night, but if you will shine, if you will be that menorah in the dark place, if you put the basket over the top of you and act just like everybody else, so that they can't differentiate between light and darkness. If you're a little fuzzy on where the edges of darkness are, or if you're a little fuzzy on where the edges of the light is, then you're really not helping other people who are also suffering under Esau's reign on earth. But the message there is when Israel, Yaakov, Jacob, remember his name changes from Jacob to Israel, or Yaakov to Israel, when he ascends as a prince of God, when he goes up to his land of inheritance, to the land of promise, it's at that point that the last cup, which is going to hold all the sins of the previous beast kingdoms. Remember the sins of Babylon, the sins of the Medes and the Persians, the sins of the Greeks, the sins of the Red One, Rome, the sins of the nations who have had those systems implanted in them. That cup contains all their sins. And now it's full. See, it doesn't usually get poured out until the cup is full. Once the cup is full, then it's poured out in wrath. Then you begin to see the judgment. If there's no more wine in the cup, right, it's over. The wine is going to be poured out into the earth. They're earthbound creatures. They cannot access that spiritual realm or go up the way that the children of Jacob can. And we saw this in last week's Torah portion. If you remember in Korach, you saw the wrath of the Lord go forth. And that's what Moses said to Aaron, like the wrath has begun. It started. But this wrath, through Moses and Aaron, the wrath is executed. But also through the advice of Moses and the actions of Aaron, it stopped. Remember, Tim Herron pointed out this had to have been one of the, not funny as in haha funny, but kind of a strange situation. You can kind of see the two brothers, they fall down And he said, just imagine them, they're on their faces in the sand, looking at one another like, now what do we do? And Moses is like, hurry, go get your censer. And Aaron's like, I just saw what happened to people who go get their censers. They got burned up. And he says, go anyway, go get your censer and go get between the people and the judgment, between them and the wrath, and stop the plague. And Aaron does. But these two events are so close together because you have Korach and his family, the rebels. We've got Datan and Aviram. We've got the rebels. They come and stand outside of their tents. And what happens? The earth opened up and swallowed them up. Well, that's exactly what happens in the wilderness in Revelation. The serpent is stalking the woman. He sends out a flood after her. And what happens? The ground opens up and swallows up the flood. Right. But, if you think about Moses and Aaron, they're two witnesses to the Torah. But also in Revelation, you have two witnesses who are going to call down fire to destroy. Right. Are those the specific two witnesses? I think it could also be Moses and Elijah. Maybe it's a representative there. I don't know for sure, but we have a pattern of Moses and Aaron working together to call in the fire, to consume the rebels and their censers. And that's, and then Moses, he calls up the consumption of the earth. He says, if you die a natural death, then I'm not true. But if something brand new happens and the earth swallows you up and consumes you, then we'll know. And that's exactly what happens. So we've got two witnesses to the testimony of the word, kind of working through these miracles of fire judgment, consuming the earth, consuming that judgment, the plague judgment. And this is the passage from last week's Torah portion, number 16:30 through 35. It says the ground under them split apart as soon as he had finished speaking all these words. Remember, the word is the testimony. The ground under them split apart, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up with their households and all the people who belonged to Korach and their goods. They went down alive into Sheol, and the earth closed over them. Fire came out from the Lord and consumed the 250 men offering incense. So we got fire coming out, miraculous fire, and then we've got the earth opening its mouth and swallowing up the flood. And remember, a flood can represent a flood of wickedness, particularly wicked words. So a flood of wicked words went after Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. Remember, they were greedy. They wanted the loot that they thought the Levites and the priests were. That's why they set up this system, so Moses and Aaron's families could benefit from the sacrifices. And Moses says, I've never asked a donkey from you. And you're about to find out that your greed is not our greed. The earth opens up and swallows them up. So if the dragon pursues the woman Israel, if she's righteous, if her heart is pure, then the accusers, the words that go after them, the earth can swallow them up, consume them. Same thing with the fire. If it's an authority issue, then fire can come out from the Lord and consume them. Right? And then we see the language as we skip down to 42 through 46. It says, when the congregation had assembled against Moses and against Aaron, they turned toward where? The tent of meeting, the Ohel Moed, the Mishkan. Behold, the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord appeared. There's the cloud again. Moses and Aaron came to the front of the tent of meeting, and the Lord said to Moses, spoke to Moses, saying, get away from the midst of this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment. There's a lot of consuming going on, right? The earth, the fire, and they fell on their faces. And Moses said to Aaron, take your censer, put fire on it from off the altar and lay incense on it and carry it quickly to the congregation and make atonement for them, for wrath has gone out from the Lord. The plague has begun. So the grumbling, right? These people saw the spectacular, miraculous judgment of Adonai, and rather recognizing that it was sin that brought on the judgment, they blamed the one who was the vehicle, the mouthpiece. And so, the same thing can happen to us. If we see judgment going around the earth and we're preaching repentance and return to the Torah, then there's going to be a significant number of people who will assemble against us. And they're going to blame us for the judgment rather than owning the responsibility for the sin. And what's going to happen? Wrath will come out. Eventually, the wrath will come. The plague will come. Let's see. I think this is pretty much what I just said. Where Revelation 12, 15, and 16, it says the serpent hurled water like a river out of his mouth. What's coming out? Water. Where is it coming from? His mouth. Remember, words come out of the mouth after the woman, so that he might cause her to be swept away with the flood. A flood of words. That's what Korach was trying to do, sweep away Moses and Aaron with a flood of words, generating his rebellion to get a flood of words. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and drank up the river, which the dragon had hurled out of its mouth. Right, so there's the dragon, and we're going to see that this dragon gives its authority to the beast. So if the dragon utters blasphemies, so will the beast. And so I guess we need to close right here because of time, but the woman Israel, there comes a point in this history of Revelation that John sees that the woman Israel is in danger of simply being swept away by a flood of wicked words in her wilderness of the peoples. She's in the wilderness when this happens. Well, in that day, it's going to be the wilderness of the peoples. Remember the mixed clay and iron feet. But if she will take heart, if she will focus on what is true, what did Moses and Aaron teach you? What is truth? Remember what you should have said? You don't believe me because I told you the truth. You don't want to know the truth. You want to be deceived. You want someone to exercise sorcery over you because you want what you want. And in that day, there will come a point where it looks like Israel is just about to be overcome by a river of wicked words. And it says the earth itself will consume them. And if we go all the way back to the serpent and bring it up to the time of Korach and the serpent, what if this flood of words that is endangering Israel is actually the word itself twisted to deceive the believer? What if people are taking the word and twisting it into a way to mean things that it never meant, it doesn't mean, and never will mean? And if they say it long enough, and if they get enough people to say it with them, they believe that they can change the mind of Elohim. That if they simply release this flood of words, they can drown out his word. If they twist his word to mean what it does not mean, they say it long enough, loud enough, with enough people, then it will simply drown out the voice of truth. They think they drown out Moses and Aaron. No, they can't. They think they can drown us out. No, they can't. You will never be able to drown the truth because the truth is, it just is, has always been, is now, will be. The twists and the deceptions of the word, they're death. They're just dead, and they'll be forever dead. And if people think they see life in twisted words, it's because they want to believe. They want to be deceived. They want sorcery exercised upon them. There is very little that could happen to you. And we're getting in again to Balak. What can happen to you? What can a sorcerer do to you if you were sealed by the Holy Spirit? What can he say except to bless you? But if you want to be deceived by a sorcerer and his words, there will be occasion for that. If that's what you want, that's what you can have. And so that's sobering. That just brings us to a place where instead of seeing the wilderness of the peoples as just kind of this chaos I need to endure until Yeshua comes and rescues me on his white horse, it's putting a lot of responsibility back in our tent to walk in faith, to be constantly aware of the flood of words, even if it is the word being twisted in a very subtle way. Did God really say? You will not surely die if you disobey his word. Did God really say? Right? Well, you're going to be like God, right? That's in his word. Well, you're made in his image. See how you can take the text and twist it, right? You can take all these wonderful sacrifices and gifts of the priesthood and the Levitical orders and twist it and say it's just because they're greedy and lazy. We're all holy. Well, yeah, it's true. We're all holy, but you just twisted what it meant. You just despised heavenly authority. And it sounded innocent, but it was wicked and the depths of evil. And look how many people wanted to be deceived by it. That's what's scary. If you want to be deceived, you'll see it. You'll think it's breathing. So we got to be careful not to give breath to any of these deceptions that might try to chase us down, because the internet has made a flood of words possible in a way like never before. Like in no other generation could literally a flood of words wear you out. And now it can't. People actually had to get to you in the good old days if they wanted to wear you out with words, right? But we help it. We open and close the gates of our eyes. So if you feel like you're getting flooded, like I said, take a break. If you know there's twisted words coming from a particular direction, close that gate. Close that gate off.